Welcome. It's January 9th, 2022. This is the new Kevin Smith show, the Great Witness series. I'm Dean Bell here with Dean Kevin, and Kevin's going to share his real side experiences with us, and we're going to become more aware through them. So hi, Kevin.
This real side experience would begin in my street. And what is being represented then generally, if my street is used as the scene, is that what is transpiring is set to become a physical level actuality relatively soon. For anything to feature on the physical, it must be decided, and all decisions, all choices, all created ideas will be instantly formulated on the real side as a simulation for all to potentially see through the other dimensions of life, effected from the other aspects, vehicles, of the created self. For as I have an idea, as I create it, I formulate it with my imagination, mind, and with perhaps emotion in addition. The idea then is expressed through the dimensions of the self, and plays out as it does dimensionally. In reality, everything is in the endless is nowness, including our creations, the moment we decide on the ideas. But literally, from the personal self-view perspective, they express from all the vehicles that were involved in the idea's inception onto the corresponding dimensions of the simulator. So the ideas we create are instantly so on the real side, and considering that all consciousness is interwoven as it is into one collective consciousness that affects overall the simulator arena, so for all those whose consciousness is a part of this collective, they then share this simulator overall with all other individuals and their respective consciousness. As this overall consciousness is the foundation from which the simulator is effected from, and so no one that shares in the effecting of a simulator is inaccessible to any other. A vast multi-dimensional game arena all participate in, and then we create individually within it as we all do, and it is these creations, these ideas and agreements that are potentially viewable by all in this simulator consequently. For as much as we might conceal our thoughts and intents on the physical, they play out automatically on the other dimensions of life, for this is the nature of a creation, that as we generate these ideas, the effects are instantly so in reality, and express in the overall simulator stadium for all beings with a consciousness that is a part of effecting the simulator to see. Hence why the real side reveals all, and as much as you can't hide from life your true intent, you can't really hide it from the simulator either, as its mechanics will always reveal your creations, ideas, and intents on the real side for all to see. For most, they will be unconscious and unaware of this, and make little effort in regulating their thoughts and emotions. But for those more skilled, more aware, and interdimensional, like the controllers are, their creations on the real side can also be disguised as to their real purpose. A purpose which will be generally that of gleaning attention, agreement, taplining, and control. And so, on the real side, it becomes rather necessary to see through the surface, a surface that would be very apparent with the ideas from the average one-dimensional human, say, but less so from a controller who is more conscious of their idea creations and takes the time to obfuscate the surface presented visual. But regardless of the layers of visual surface deception, always the nature of the idea and the consciousness intent of the individual who created it are as ideas that, although may not be available to a personal self that can only deal in the simulation surface visuals, the real awareness that is part of all real awareness, part of this isness everything reality, that is through then all the created personal vehicles and their effected simulation, and has access to all ideas that are through all consciousness, can then afford the personal self-impressions as to the reality of the surface simulation situation, or the surface body form of individuals that we experience, assuming we remain in the nowness of the real awareness reality, and as we do, so always can we have the personal self apprised of the actuality of all we encounter. Ideas created always start on the real side, most of which are rather fleeting, as ideas constantly are created, agreement fluctuating, like someone constantly switching TV channels as they go from one idea to the next, and instantly real side simulated manifest as they might be, due to the nature of the consciousness and its overall agreement construction. The physical level plays out that the agreement ideas are not instantly so, but rather process through their sequences, as the limitations of distance and time have been applied, that dictates an idea can't instantly manifest, that the thought of a car won't make it so, such as it is in reality and on the real side, but rather the car must be built, the work required, etc. All that has been decided that must go into the building of a car, amidst all the other limited decided factors involved that play out on the physical and ensure a car can't simply manifest. And only if the idea of a car is focused upon, the agreement to it is maintained, will all the various factors come together, the circumstances, the specific people required, etc., and then the decided mechanics of the physical level limitations worked with, that it becomes a physical level reality, as though all the components of the instantly manifested idea on the real side must slowly coagulate and merge for it to be made physical level manifest. If I play a computer game, I can't simply add whatever I want to the game. I have to work within the mechanics of the game's construction, the overall agreed to ideas of the collective consciousness that affects that particular game shared simulation. In some games, you can walk up to a character and ask for a house, and it pops into existence. In other games, you have to gather materials and develop your character's building skills that this can be so. Different games with different consciousness agreements which dictate limitations, restrictions, what you can or can't do, the difference between just asking for a house and it be there, or that the process is more laborious. And so it is with the human collective consciousness, and the shared collective, effected, simulated physical experience, as to the actualizing of whatever it is that is desired on the physical. And as we can see, for any idea to become a physical level actuality, so must agreement to that idea be maintained long enough for it to be so. And what we see playing out on the real side are then all the endless array of ideas that are being created, that are potential physical level actualities, but only if agreement to them is perpetuated, and all these ideas yet to potentially be a physical level occurrence are what we would call future views. Naturally, it wouldn't make sense to view all these endless, fleeting ideas, even though we potentially could if we decided. But standing in the real awareness, nowness reality, as we always endeavour to do, so the real awareness that has full access to every idea throughout the overall consciousness always will show the personal self that which makes the most sense for it to see, which future view of all the potentialities that are available, which are generally the views that make the most sense to be shown according to each individual and their respective awareness journey, and as it pertains to situations that will directly impact them in accordance with their planetary positioning, etc., or according to the specific focus they might have. Again, all that is shown will always make sense to be so, if indeed we have aligned the personal self with the real intent of overall is recognition. Then everything simulated we experience will play out to the culmination of that intent, and the simulation will always reflect the intent. So a decision and intent to be real must always yield experience and a simulated situation that is a benefit to life and awareness overall. That ideas begin on the real side and become physical level impacting can be expressed in our recreated houses on the real side, houses that represent the consciousness and the multi-dimensional nature of it, in that the ideas agreed to will feature first on the second floor, which represents the real side, and should they have agreement to them retained, they would filter down and be present on the ground floors, which represents the agreement being set to express on the physical level in some shape or form. A similar representation can be how, instead of situations being shown to my personal self on the real side in wherever scenes, settings, and locations these might be, they are shown instead taking place in my physical level street recreated, indicating again the transition of the actualizing of the agreement ideas from the real side to the physical, assuming agreement is maintained. And so the ground floor house representation would reveal the individual agreements we are making. The street would reveal the collective consciousness agreements more so, as invariably these street views involve far more people and impending situations that will impact on a more collective scale, agreements that are imminent physical actualities, but again with no guarantee, as even at the last possible moment agreement can change, and it won't become so on the physical level. And so this experience would find me exiting my personal self-house, and rather a kidnap attempt was in effect, as I was immediately accosted by a selection of ill-intended individuals who had pulled up in a van. Generally, we are more assured of our protection on the real side, as through the real awareness nowness position can we be aside from any agreements in the consciousness that have us unable to deal with situations and handle assailants. As everything is decided and agreed upon, including the success by which we are assailed, or circumstances we can't deal with, all must be agreements in the consciousness. So, stepping aside from that consciousness into the real awareness nowness has us no longer the effects, the experiencer of these ideas. We have nullified any possibility of having our simulated personal self-vehicle harmed, in other words. But when it comes to future views, we are being shown the potentiality of agreements being made possibly manifest on the physical, and they will play out as they very likely will therefore when and if they become a physical level actuality, as opposed to our real side experiences where we are going through our process and the real awareness is handling business. If the personal self allows it, if we remain in the nowness of the real awareness reality, in other words, and place the personal self aside. And so it did seem that this kidnapping effort was a heads-up possibility, and that it would very likely succeed, as I was bundled into the van, but would never see what transpired beyond that point, as the personal self only was revealed that glimpse. Very likely then, the dark forces making such a move on the physical at some point, as they surely would want to remove or eliminate anyone undermining their controlling systems, which are dependent on agreement. And for those becoming more aware and encouraging others to do likewise, this agreement becomes gradually retracted. For the process of awareness is a gradual divorcing of agreements to the consciousness, a consciousness that, as all consciousness generally is at this time in this simulator, designed to effect overall the simulated experience that the controllers desire. And so, as individual agreement is redacted from this consciousness of control, so will this impact the controlled simulated matrix the controllers wish to maintain. The next scene would still feature in my street, and as I said, that I was possibly to be kidnapped represented a personal agreement which would then more likely have featured in my house on the ground floor, but as I exited the house onto the street and it took place there, it suggested what followed involved more so others, more so a collective agreement, and with collective experiential ramifications, that was somehow linked with the kidnapping scene. For the scenes that followed were assignment orientated and would then be beneficial for all life, and so perhaps the kidnapping was due to my continued activity in this regard, as I and others continue to attempt to improve the simulator situation. But from the controller's perspective, all that do represent opposition to their control. For now, a group of individuals were present. I seemed affiliated with them, and as much as it was rather apparent as to the ill-intended nature of the previous scene's kidnappers, no real awareness, intent, discernment necessary. These individuals were more of the becoming aware variety. Among the group was a particularly aware character, and although I wouldn't suggest he was a guide, he was far more aware than most, and was especially gifted also. He had a complete awareness of his consciousness, as though the facing of the self, the becoming conscious of all the tap-line agreements it contained, was complete for him, no longer enslaved by the unconscious effects of anything of it, and also a complete mastery of all his body vehicles, in that he could manipulate the simulation as he saw fit, through abilities gleaned via the ethereal vehicle, the ability to be aside from any restrictions and limitations installed in the consciousness on the physical, a little like being able to make adjustments to the data files that make up the computer game you play at any time of your choosing, to alter your environment, imbue your avatar with additional abilities, etc. And so, as in the game analogies from earlier, as my character is confronted with the limitations and decided laws regarding house building, I simply am aside from these limitations. In the game affected by the consciousness, but not bound by the ideas it contains, and can summon a house into manifestation. He was rather a stern character too, sincere enough, and stepping up, and supporting of life, and evidently affiliated with this group and I, who also were on our respective awareness journeys. As I said, my suddenly in the company of this group seemed somehow associated with the potential kidnapping effort. Perhaps what we were doing had opened up an agreement window where an attack opportunity was possible. For as we agree and take on certain ideas, certain assignments, we do open ourselves up to all individuals associated with the idea, including any dark force characters. And again, according to our consciousness, dictates our ability to have our safety assured in regards to these ill-intended characters, and a consciousness not fully released in regards to the tap-line agreements it contains, a process still ongoing. So certain agreements may involve others and their power over us, and if these agreements are yet to be released, so we can potentially experience the effects of an ill-intended, constructed consciousness. As we turn over the stones, we may inadvertently find a poisonous serpent beneath them, and if agreements through our consciousness dictate its ability to harm us, then this is what we can potentially experience. We can find ourselves attacked and kidnapped on the real side and on the physical. For what we were doing wasn't exactly clear, only that this gifted individual seemed essential that we could proceed, and indeed would facilitate our sudden removing to a completely different location. That the real awareness can show the personal self anything simulated that effects from consciousness is a given, so nothing is off limits or inaccessible to the real awareness, and indeed then, anything taking place in creation, the personal self can be afforded the view of. But should we wish to engage with individuals or situations in the simulation, we rather need to find agreements where our personal self can be inserted into that which we wish to engage with. If we activate through the personal self, we are instantly in the overall simulator arena that effects from consciousness our consciousness is a part of, moving from the real awareness aside from creation view to insertion of the personal self within it. Both afford the same view, but now we can engage with those within the simulation rather than just observing them. And the simulator, the dimensions of it, are according to what is decided through the consciousness. And so, when we work with those operating solely on the consciousness simulated side, we rather make use of what has been decided as to the geography, the mechanics, the portals, etc. For we can skip over these decided, simulated means of motion and travel via our real awareness that just installs its personal self wherever it wants. But if we are engaging with those that have decided to be limited to how the simulation effects from the consciousness, we rather have to play in their game, to use these portals, these decided mechanics, spacecraft travelling on the real side, etc. And so it seemed to be the case that this gifted individual was the only one, or perhaps one of a few, who could access a certain area of creation. This then was a decided agreement through the consciousness overall that this be the case. As everything is what is decided, and if there are no-go areas or places inaccessible that require portals, incantations, symbols, or secret knowledge, then this simply is a decided and agreed to consciousness to simulation effected situation. So, as I said, my group and I were rather going along with this, that this individual was required to take us to this location, for where he might be, and as I said, the impression of a completing of his awareness as it pertained to facing the consciousness. But it's as though he wasn't interested in getting beyond a simulator and personal self-consciousness he had effectively mastered, and so was very much choosing to resign himself to creation. And to engage with him, we rather had to engage with then the decided mechanics of multi-dimensional creation as it effects from the consciousness, for perhaps this individual would be very instrumental in developments to come, gifted as he was. We were transported. This individual would activate something, the details of which were somewhat obscured from my personal view, and find ourselves in what seemed to be a kind of technological series of chambers. It was perhaps then a part of creation on the real side that was technologically related, and although now the man who had facilitated our access to this particular location now had departed, as though he had fulfilled his purpose, each one of this group had a particular skill or ability that was essential for traversing through these chambers. It was rather difficult to describe, but presented as though a kind of gauntlet of traps and obstacles designed to prevent anyone passing through these chambers who didn't have the necessary skills to disarm them. And so, as I said, my group were picked seemingly for this task, that we could successfully navigate through the traps and presumably reach some area within this technological location we sought. I would never see the culmination of our infiltration, though my impressions were we were doing so without issue, and so very likely succeeded in our endeavours. But the scene would switch again, and I was now with the same group, but with additional individuals. Although I didn't recognise exactly who the group were that were infiltrating the technological series of chambers, my personal self unable to determine them, and indeed no impressions afforded, as perhaps the detail wasn't necessary, my impressions of the larger body of individuals my group and I now joined were that these were more those that I knew and had affiliation with from the physical level, from these galactic SKYPE groups, the Earth-bound Nufriends, etc. Of all of them, the only one I did recognise visually would be a new friend by the name of Jeremy. We were gathered in an open country area, and seemed we had an objective to reach a certain country, and the country in question seemed to be Africa. And indeed, we would all gather around a map of the country, as though we needed to be familiar with its geography, as perhaps this was another potential future view, where for whatever reason we would actually be travelling to this country. My impressions were that there was great danger involved with this endeavour, though details were not afforded. perhaps travel restrictions imposed through the pandemic, etc., if indeed this was a future view, but regardless, it seemed imperative we go to Africa. It wasn't a case that we all would do so. A few were reluctant, due to the risks involved, or perhaps the difficulty with doing so, through the various restricting travelling factors that are continually being globally implemented. Interesting was the map of Africa, for as we unrolled it, it seemed excessively long, suggesting the country was far larger than it actually was, and the shape wasn't as it is generally depicted on standard maps either. It was far more elongated. It had a section of it that was in addition to the usual depiction of the country that extended from it and became progressively narrower, which effectively at least tripled the overall land mass of the country. It's not beyond possibility that what we have been told and shown in regards to maps and countries provided by the controllers isn't entirely accurate. Indeed, there is much evidence to suggest the planet is far larger and has far more land masses and countries that most are not aware of, perhaps secret areas that only the controllers utilize, such as revealed by Admiral Byrd during his explorations, as he found uncharted countries beyond Antarctica. And so, it's possible here that we had an assignment that involved Africa, and that Africa is somewhat different in shape and size than we have been shown and told. And indeed, our specific destination was the extended part of Africa that featured on our map, but that would not be so on any standard maps the public have access to, and who knows what may be found there, for the purpose of this expedition wasn't revealed, only that it was to be undertaken, and I and a few of this group overall would decide to embark on it, and so perhaps a potential physical level assignment.
Yeah, good for you. You're taking on the adventures. I have this teacher I study with. He's all into the consciousness thing, which is, as we see it, created, but most people still are on the view that it's like an ultimate, God consciousness and self-consciousness, which Paul marketed, God consciousness. So this particular teacher I had, he was really into it. I mean, he wrote books, and he's like Eckhart Tolle, Tolle that talks about the now. He goes really deep into it, and this fellow too was into consciousness a lot, mainly from the Eastern viewpoint. But he was going around in circles, because that's just still in creation, and as we see it, consciousness is created. So he was creating ideas around ideas around ideas. So we encourage people to see that there's more than just consciousness. Okay, and then you talked about ideas and people, like in the beginning, about the people have, a lot of people switching around like channels, and they have different ideas, and you kind of get lost. You go out from where you are, which is your real awareness, and they go out thinking that they're doing something and getting something accomplished, but they're just out there doing things away from the real awareness. Gathering experiences is fine, but everything is now, here and now. So you can actually be here and now and have all these other things, view these other things without moving around. Just by being now, it's like being on the top of a mountain. You can see everything around you without moving. Or you can go down the mountain and start, moving your whatever attention, body, or whatever to different locations. But if you're on top of the mountain, you can see everything without moving around, and that's the real awareness. It's just now. It's always here now. Brain goes like this, uses a symbol. So it's everything you need, everything you want, is it here and now. He talks about also, Dwayne talks about do without doing, or effortless effort. And that's part of like letting go of the free will. The free will gets us in trouble. We think we have freedom to do what we want, but if we get in a position without that free will, well, we don't have to utilize it. We just see things, see what needs to be done, see what life shows us. Then we can do without doing and avoid the struggle that we have with the personal self and its free will. And that's, again, ongoing for most people. That the effortless effort, do without doing idea is just seeing. It's a seeingness, beingness, being now. So there's no as much, you can say, aggravation as you get from the personal self, and its struggle to get its wants and desires met and all that. So you can still do it. That's the neat thing about this. You can still have whatever you want, but there's more. Most people just want what they want, and they think that's the ultimate. But if they go beyond that, I mean, there's so much more. You can still have it, but there's more. And that means like letting go of the attachment part of it. You can have it, but really you don't own it. You're just experiencing it for a while, but you don't own it. You move on. You don't really own anything here. We're just utilizing it.
In this real side experience, I would find myself in a large, natural setting in a dense and vibrant jungle. There was a clear area amidst the jungle that had been established as a kind of training area, almost military in the feel of it. It was here in this clearing that I specifically found myself. The view afforded, lacking the stages that had brought me to this point, but all would be revealed to my personal self, along with a few real awareness impressions thrown in to add detail. For there was a group of individuals here, numbering around 30 or so, I would estimate, and all were of the becoming more aware and endeavouring for ease recognition ultimately type, as were my impressions. It was very much like a training, although I couldn't quite clearly recall what the training consisted of. It was as though it were something that my personal self could make little sense of, and even now, as I write this, I can sort of see what was happening in my recollection, but it's as though it belonged in another reality, untouchable by this one, to the extent that to see it clearly I would have to be there again, as though even the memory of it can only filter through in degrees, almost as though the two realities cannot intermingle in any shape or form. The full recollection gets rather stuck part way. Even during the experience, I had the sense I would struggle to remember detail, and would run the experience through several times on the real side after it had concluded before waking. But even then, it would partially slip away. The best I can describe it as was as a kind of training, and there was an individual there who evidently was a guide, based on his aura of isness being realness, and he was instructing this group of individuals. It may have been a place in life where greater recognition was required to perceive it, and indeed bring it back to the physical. A good scheme, if only to keep what was occurring from dark force prying eyes. Dark force individuals who would be unable to perceive such activities due to their extreme lack of recognitional acumen. As for me, well, I was here not just in an observing capacity as a witness, but rather in a participatory one as well, invited to be involved with the training and such. It became very apparent that this group was very advanced, awareness speaking, and were receiving the kind of training appropriate to their awareness and recognition. As a result, I would somewhat struggle with the practices they were undertaking, whatever the nature of them were. I suppose trainings would become far less visual, far less movement and motion orientated, the more aware you become and the closer you stand to the state of being that is the isness true reality that we are. It would be then activity that would become more so invisible and indecipherable to the personal self, and lack any of the decided laws of creation, that of movement, distance, and such, and the personal self then could only apply a vague notion of what was going on based on the references it has. A kind of training was the best it could manage, explanation-wise. After the training and my inadequacy for what it involved, the guide would take me to one side and explain a little of what was transpiring here, because during my apparent lack of ability where the training was concerned, I became somewhat irritable and a shade sulky, as I am prone to do on occasion. My fallback personal self-attitude, especially with something I find that I want to do, but either struggle with it or am unable. The guide would reveal that this was indeed an advanced group, and I was rather being eased into it. It was my first day with this particular group, and I had just made the mark, as it were, just enough awareness to qualify. This would explain my struggle with the training, a training that was of a kind that required a certain level of awareness beyond that which I had previously accrued. A little like a similar experience I shared before, where I needed to make a few adjustments to my personal self to assume a position there also. Both that and this position seemingly different, but ultimately the same, different parts of the same overall is recognition objective. Endless expressions of multi-dimensional trainings and activities taking place as our real intent for standing real with the ears and the guides is maintained, and the personal self gets glimpses of some of them, or aspects of them, from time to time. I would walk with this guide, and he took me to what looked like a mini stone structure. I had the sense it probably was something entirely different, but that's the best I could make sense of it with the application of personal self-references. Again, at the time, it had a certain appearance, but when reaching the personal self on waking, a stone circle was the closest approximation. The guide invited that I step within this circle. I would do so. Something occurred, something activated, the impression of light and being momentarily scanned within this light. The guide explained that this stone circle determined everything of an individual, of their created consciousness, and was designed to detect specific traits that would be beneficial for this training here. For even though the personal self and creation is a reality aside from that which we are striving to stand real in, that of the isness, we do use everything to get us there, and some personal self abilities, causal vehicle stored experience references that we may be unconscious of, traits, etc., can be determined and utilized beneficially for this end. In this case, whatever this device was scanning for, it failed to find, and this again was a reason for my struggle with the training. As this specific group had some developed element or ability in their created consciousness that certainly was very advantageous for this training, though not completely necessary, as it was after all about awareness really. I don't exactly remember the trait, though I'm sure the reference the guide mentioned was something along the lines of dragons or some such. Something else I couldn't quite pull through to the physical on waking. I had the impression also that the reason I had been able to hear as much as I did from the guide was that he had rather removed us into a slightly lesser position, and even though we still walked within this overall scene, we were in a kind of a Faraday cage pocket dimension, where it was less a strain to recognize the impressions the guide conveyed that it would have been had he engaged with me in the place we were in, although still demanding a degree of recognition regardless, that not everything the guide imparted was able to be understood and recognized. That experience was from January the 14th, 2021.
You know, just like in school, when we go through the different grades, all of a sudden it's the first day in the new class. All of a sudden we're in 3rd or 4th grade or whatever it is, or high school. Yeah, it's all a little bit awkward, and we have to kind of become familiar with what's going on and the surroundings and the people and the consciousness and all these things. And so, no, it's all fine. You're doing great. All that matters is the intent. And how many of us have maybe gone to high school or even college where when we're the new guy, we're kind of poked fun at or whatever, or there's some bully there or something's going on, okay? And just like when you go in the military in boot camp, they kick your ass the first day, don't they? So they shuffle you around and they call you stupid and whatever. So this is great. It's all okay. The best part is that as you have that intent with the all is to continue on, that's all that matters. That is what's seen. So through all these lifetimes that we've struggled and suffered to get here, to finally see that it's all okay, but we still have to be rattled at times to, you know, see what's going on, and that's okay too. And the only reason they do it is because 100% they care. That's why. So that's terrific, Kevin.
I think it's neat how you had the wherewithal to try to bring back the experience. You hung around there a little bit to see if you can bring it back, but you had the, you know, awareness to do that. Were you able to, do you think that helped? The beginning of the experience, you talked about that, where you tried to gather the experience and to make sure you brought it back to the physical. On the real side, you were doing this.
Yeah, this is something I do quite habitually, where I'll have my real side experience, and I know I know the experience has concluded. I'm on the verge to returning and waking to the physical, but I prevent myself from doing so. And I actually rerun the real side experience over several times, like almost like replaying a movie a number of times before I wake up on the physical. And then when I do wake up on the physical, I just stay in the nowness of my real awareness position. I don't activate any of the thoughts or the emotions of my consciousness, which is the best place to retain yourself on waking to facilitate best recollection. And then in that position, I'm fully on the physical, but I remain in my nowness state, and I haven't activated anything on the mind or the emotions. And again, I run through the experience several times, and then only then will I then get up and write some notes down, and then later on write it out to share later. It's quite a common practice. And that's what I was saying quite recently, where because I was having very bad respiration, this was robbing me of my ability to wake up, be in this nowness state, and then have better recollection. Because as I was waking up, I was instantly waking up and unable to breathe and spending several hours coughing and hacking and trying to gather my breath. And so this was rather detrimental to my recollection. But in more recent weeks, my respiration trouble is easing off, and so now I'm able to turn more so to that, to a position where I can have better recall of my real side experiences.
That's neat. Yeah, it's neat also that you're able to, make this, I don't want to say commonplace, but more, common for people, that these things are not like, out of the ordinary, fantastic. I mean, anybody can do this. Anybody can have experiences on the real side. They're dreaming. Most people are anyway, but you can play around with this. You can get guidance. You can do so much when you're multidimensional, and you're not just in awe of stuff, but you're actually doing things in a practical way on the other dimensions, and learning how to recognize this reality through those things. So that's the great thing about what you're doing. You may help people to see, if they find themselves on the real side, how to navigate and how to do things, how to see things, and it's just wonderful. I mean, not many people are really doing this. They're more in the woo-woo kind of stuff, but you kind of make it real, down to earth in a way, but yet multidimensional. And again, we're pointing to this isness, this recognition of this reality through these experiences. But the experiences, the more you have, the more you are able to see them from different, you're getting different viewpoints and all. The better off, the more you see, more your awareness expands, and the more you have a chance to recognize this isness, which is what we're really here for, everybody. Become more aware, recognize this reality. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Anything else you want to end with?
Well, I was going to touch briefly on a comment that you were mentioning earlier in regards to how people have put such great stock in the consciousness and God consciousness. And it could well be argued that you could actually say that the consciousness really is God consciousness, as in Callum God consciousness, as in a consciousness that has been manipulated by the Callum God through all his hierarchy of control systems and structures throughout to the dimensional creation in order to effect a simulation according to the Callum gods and the reptilians' desires. And so when people do speak of God consciousness, that is fairly accurate in a sense, because the God, the Callum God, has indeed manipulated the consciousness in order to bring about and effect this overall literal simulated distorted matrix that we all are currently experiencing. So
yeah. And then you find yourself in the position of, black or white magic. You get the powers, so-called powers, and if you don't see that there's something more than that, then you're stuck with these, still in cause and effect, and still with the good and evil idea. And then you're easily, then the influence comes, and this another kind of consciousness that comes to try to seduce you into being controlled, basically, and restrictive. But in the meantime, you have all these so-called powers and over other people, and you become the black magician or the controller or the reptilian. But there's so much more than that, and that's to get through our 5 bodies and the creation simulator here. It's tough, but fortunately we have a few people like you here, that Dwayne, that are pointing the way to do it. So appreciate it. Thank you. NUUU.